Hello and welcome to our Strasz Assessment Systems podcast, Beyond the Test Strasz Talks. I'm your host, Rory McCorkle, and really excited about an interesting topic that we have for today, which is discussing longitudinal assessment, which is certainly a assessment methodology that has made a lot of waves in recent history, especially on the healthcare credentialing side of the industry. And even more so, I'm pleased to have our guest here, Josh Goodman. He is from NCCPA, the physician assistants, for those who are not familiar. Josh, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Rory. Thanks for having me.
So, Josh, could you tell people a little bit about who you are and what you do for NCCPA?
Sure thing. Yeah, I'm the Vice President of Research and Exam Programs here at NCCPA. I've been with the organization about 10 years. We do all things certification, recertification, certificates for the physician assistant, physician associate world.
Awesome, man. Yeah, you have quite a purview, that I know. I know it keeps you hopping. Well, would love for you to tell me as well, as we always start with our podcast, what brought you to the wild world of testing?
Yeah, I imagine you don't hear often. I always grew up dreaming that one day I could be a psychometrician.
Once in a while.
I am not that person. I started my career in education. I was a science teacher in North Carolina in the Greensboro, High Point area in the late 90s, early 2000s, right at the beginning of the accountability boom, No Child Left Behind, where everyone, every kid at every grade level, every subject, it seemed, was subject to some sort of state testing program, some state testing requirement. So I was no stranger to testing. I knew after about 5 or 6 years teaching science that I wanted to do something more. I was interested in education. And I was lucky at that point. I was teaching a little private school. One of the board members was an associate dean at the School of Education at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. And I was just talking to her. I was like, I want to do something more, maybe science ed, maybe curriculum. I know the School of Ed at UNCG is really good. And she stopped me and said, there is a really great program that's kind of a hidden secret we have at UNCG. It's the Educational Research Methodology Program. It's got great faculty. It's a small program. I really think even if you decide you don't want to go that direction ultimately and you do something else, you'll get great methods training, great statistical training, great assessment training. It's well worth it. Maybe just start with the master's, see where it leads. Maybe you go on and do curriculum work somewhere else. Maybe you really like it. And I mean, it was an amazing pairing. I couldn't have asked for better advice. I started that program part-time. I was still teaching full-time at that point in time. And really just it clicked immediately. I had great faculty members. Rick Lecht is a well-known out there in the world and contributor in the assessment world. Terry Ackerman, lots of great faculty members. And just immediately it clicked. I knew I wanted to stay in education. This was a way I could stay in that world. And it was just a fantastic fit for kind of my interest, my background. And I just rolled with it. I started in that master's program, enrolled in the PhD program shortly after that. And that was it. Like I was hooked. I was in the world of measurement after that.
That's awesome, man. I mean, that's about as close as a response to I dreamt of being a psychometrician when I grew up that we'll probably ever hear on this podcast.
Exactly.
Well, Josh, of course, having you on here today because NCCPA has been one of the groups that have implemented longitudinal assessment. In fact, y'all have even won some awards for it. But to start just one level back, for those unfamiliar, what is longitudinal assessment, and how does it really differ from our traditional? You have to get 60, PDUs or CEUs, what have you, for recertification.
Yeah, and to some degree, we still have some of those more traditional requirements. PAs are required to continue doing medical, education throughout CMEs all the way throughout their career. Every 2 years, there's a requirement. The PA profession does require recertification every 10 years. And up until just recently, it really was a traditional, linear, very long, broad medical knowledge exam. It felt very much out of sync with the work that PAs were doing. We certainly got no shortage of complaints about having to stop everything I'm doing, study for 3 weeks, do a boot camp, and then go do this point in time test that covered all sorts of things that I'm not doing as a clinician anymore. There was lots of pushback against that process as not being useful to the end user. Our main charge is to protect the public and make sure that clinicians are safe, that PAs out there are doing good work, and someone can point to that certification and say there's high standards and high expectations of those clinicians. But we also want that to be useful to that end user, to the PA who's engaging in that process. It should be valuable to them as well. So longitudinal assessment kind of takes a different look on assessment. It is still covering much of the same information you might have in a point in time examination, but the focus is, rather than trying to figure out what you know right now, to help identify things that you both have good, solid knowledge foundation on, and places where maybe your skills have slipped. Because PAs practice in a variety of specialties and recertification is a general exam, if you're working in dermatology, it's reasonable to expect that you're not doing a lot of psychiatry or working in reproductive health very often. And some of that knowledge has slipped, but because of the way PAs are licensed, they're able to change specialty areas over time. So we want to make sure that they maintain that knowledge. So a longitudinal assessment system spreads out that test over some period of time. Usually quarterly is kind of the model that most organizations are following. So a little mini test every quarter for several years. And every single one of those tests, the idea is to identify places that you're good to go. You answer questions, multiple choice questions, could be other types of questions as you go along. And as you answer those questions, you get immediate feedback. So do you know this? Do you not know this? You get a rationale. We ask people to self-assess. Am I confident in the answer I supplied? Is it relevant to the work I'm doing every day? But the idea is to use that combination of, did you get it right, immediate feedback, and that self-assessment to identify places where there might be knowledge gaps. Then in future quarters, we can revisit those topics. So maybe you missed that question on hypertension this time around. You might see one next quarter or a quarter after that somewhere down the road. And the idea is to both assess those things that a PA knows right now, has on hand, identify places where maybe those skills have slipped a little bit, but give that opportunity to self-remediate and then address that knowledge gap at a later point in time. And we feel like this is a nice way, spreading that over time allows PAs to reflect, to remediate, to fill those knowledge gaps. And the idea is to make them better clinicians ultimately, rather than what you know, what you don't know. The idea is to keep that continuous knowledge growth happening over time and make sure that we maintain competent clinicians and practitioners over time.
So, Josh, tell me, obviously you've covered really well, I think, how you all have implemented the concept. When you all were looking at this, actually, I know you looked at other programs as exemplars. Where did you see maybe some key differences in your implementation versus maybe some of that benchmarking that you did?
Sure. Yeah. So we were kind of early in the game of longitudinal assessment. We certainly had great models. The American Board of Anesthesiology, American Board of Pediatrics, both working with medical practitioners much like we are, implemented at an earlier phase, and lots of other groups in the medical space were examining about the same time we are. I think that everyone has their own kind of take on what they might do. For us, it was important to make sure that we're covering a broad span of knowledge. PAs do practice in specialty areas, but are certified in a more general sense. Mm-hmm. And that's a little bit different than what you might see with the American Board of Pediatrics, where everyone's working in pediatrics, and you might have a subspecialty. You might be practicing in a very specific area, and they do allow some additional focus in those areas. For us, it was making sure that that was a broad knowledge base. Mm-hmm. And along with that, making sure that we were giving adequate time per item, almost everyone's timing at the item level, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. We wanted to make sure that PAs that were engaging with the content, if they didn't know that content, had an opportunity to consult references, much as they might do in practice. You step out of the examination room, it's totally foreseeable that you might pull out your phone and look at UpToDate or one of the other medical references to see what's happening, what's current practice. what kind of prescribing might be happening. So to make sure we had that right amount of time, but covering that broad general blueprint. Other groups, pediatrics, is tied to objectives, and they published the objectives ahead of time, year by year. Anesthesiology really went for a minute per item approach, and it was meant to be fundamental in your head knowledge that you should be able to demonstrate right now. We're all doing similar things with that, immediate feedback, and then some sort of revisiting topics that you may not have been successful on. But everyone's got a little spin, I think, to kind of fit the needs of their particular set of clinicians.
Well, I appreciate that differentiation, especially for those who, may be watching this and have considered the concept, to know that, there are some core commonalities, some core principles to implementing this, but there also are some flavors to choose from, and certainly, adapting that to one's use case can be possible. So you mentioned, and I will have to tell you, way back when I was a proctor at a test center, I encountered some of your recertification candidates, and no, they weren't always the most excited for that experience. So curious to hear, how has the experience been with Longitudinal, and how has the feedback maybe changed or transformed from your traditional recert exam?
Yeah, so absolutely. No one is terribly excited to take a 5-hour examination. Like, it's not how on anyone's list of an experience we're looking forward to. And so we did hear ad nauseum sometimes how unhappy individuals were with the way that exam felt. Really, I think the big complaint is I'm getting nothing out of this. I'm doing it because I have to. It's part of certification. We believe that certification is important. So I'll go through the motions, but I'm not getting anything out of it as a clinician. I'm cramming, I'm studying for a little bit of time. I go in, I brain dump on that screen. I hit every question, I leave. Maybe get a score report 3 days later, but I really haven't internalized what I did well on, what I got right, what I got wrong. We haven't done anything other than say, enough.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not doing anything in that space of, but here are places where maybe I got a little bit that I could brush up on, that I could know. We have had pretty good feedback from our longitudinal. We did a 2-year pilot and really tried to focus on those pilot users. It was about 60% of those that would have been eligible to recertify in those years opted into the longitudinal option. The rest took the traditional exam, but we probed them quarterly for feedback. How's this going? Do you have enough time? Are you enjoying using resources? Are you reading the feedback we're giving you, the rationales we're giving you? And we got pretty positive feedback there. The most recent instantiation of the longitudinal assessment did build on some of the lessons we learned. One thing we learned is that the need to participate in every quarter in a row is sometimes unfeasible, even though it's only 25 items at a time for us, once per quarter. Doing that every quarter for 2-3 years in a row, sometimes life gets in the way. And there was this desire for flexibility. We built that into the new instantiation, that there is the opportunity to take those quarters off if you need to. You just have to successfully complete the right number of quarters, but you have some flexibility as to when you do them. If you do them all in a row, you might exit the process a little faster. If you want to take the fourth quarter of every year off, or you're going to ability. And that has been one of the biggest things we've heard from our end users. PAs like the flexibility. They like being able to sit down and doing a little bit of testing at their choosing, do it all at once. I could log in and take one question a day for 30 days if I wanted to, or I could sit down the last day, 2 hours before the deadline, and do all of my questions. But it's up to me as the user of the assessment of how I want to pace that out. And that I can have that flexibility that sometimes something comes up. I'm sick, I'm not feeling good. We just had an addition to the family and we want to take some time off. Mm-hmm. It allows for some of that flexibility. So that has been a big resounding success. The other thing that we hear is that there is a real recognition of value in seeing immediately which questions you miss and which ones you get right. Knowing that I still remember that I still have that information is reassuring to a PA. Maybe I'm not working in dermatology, but I still know how to treat X, Y, and Z, even all these years later. That's great. But there's also that real recognition that there's knowledge that maybe has escaped us in the time since we last saw it or since our PA training program. That's valuable. and then knowing that you're going to get a chance to revisit that later. So I missed that question. That's critical knowledge. I'm going to see that again, and the next time I'm ripe, I'm ready, and I'm going to answer that question right. There's that identification of the end user that that's beneficial to them. For us, when we communicate to the public, it's saying your PA might not have known that, but we're doing everything we can do to make sure that competence is continued throughout practice, that when knowledge does start to gap, that we can identify and help those clinicians find ways to fill those gaps as they move on. And there's been a real appreciation on the PA side for that. And also, I think it's a strong message to our big stakeholder ultimately is the public, that we're doing what we can to make sure that clinicians are up to date always.
Well, and I love with the enhancements that you've made, an ongoing theme in a lot of current credentialing, let's call them trends, whether it's personalized certification or such. Fundamentally, what you're talking about is giving back some agency. And in that sense, I think that's a great raison d'etre, for these types of enhancements. So really glad to hear that. Now, you've said it's gone very well, but none of these changes come without pain. I love the laugh. So I'm curious to hear, what operational, cultural, governance, or bureaucratic hurdles, were really had to be overcome to implement this.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and they always stack up. We always find new challenges, new things that, keep us up at night or worry us. Honestly, for NCCPA, we built our own exam driver to deliver this examination. I know lots of other groups are using, there are lots of great platforms out there for smaller groups that may not have that capability, but it really put us in the seat of being an exam provider in a way that we had never been before. And that means there's a lot more interaction and control over that environment, but also a lot more troubleshooting when things happen. Servers go down, internet connections break, something occurs where someone can't access an exam and it's critical. And we've really had to investigate how do we interact with the test takers in a different way, rather than just as the credentialing board, right, the regulatory body. We're taking this different seat. And that's been a growth step for us, but a good growth step. I think it puts us closer in contact with our end users and hearing things directly that we may not ordinarily hear, which has been really valuable. It also turns out that longitudinal assessment, because of the nature of the exam, because it's unproctored, because it's ongoing, items are highly disposable. And I don't have to tell anyone that works in the assessment space how expensive it is to develop content. It's not cheap. It's our biggest investment as an organization is building good items to deliver consistently, that do what they're supposed to. We have to develop a lot more of them. And we're having to develop a lot more. For us, we develop items that come in sets when we're going to remediate a question that was wrong. You don't get the same item again. You get a similar item on the same topic, which means we're developing items in sets of 2 or 3. Each one also has that rationale, that critique. So it's more items, but they're more labor-intensive items. It means that we have had to redouble our efforts in item writing, recruiting PAs to come write items. It has been a real challenge to keep up with the demands of essentially an item-hungry assessment system, and rethinking how we can gain some efficiencies. Are there other tools out there that we might use to help us do that? We also have PAs coming in and out of this program on an ongoing basis. Every year we're adding 15, 16, 18, 20,000 more PAs and exiting month by month as people complete the requirement. So rather than it being tied to you and your exam date, you're done, here's your score report, we have this more ongoing interactions with people entering and exiting the longitudinal assessment. So just a lot of logistic changes for us in how we think about how people interact with the assessment. There's always the worry about an unproctored exam and what that means, how people are accessing information, what's happening to your items. Is someone feeding them to ChatGPT, or is our whole bank exposed? How are PAs using technology then to answer questions, and trying to keep a handle and keep a good balance on that. I mean, ultimately, I think it's not a terrible thing that PAs might be using online repositories of information to help answer questions. They're learning, and that's the real goal. But also as a clinician, I hope you're using every resource you do when I'm the patient to help treat. And so it's not ultimately a bad thing, but trying to find that right balance of protecting the bank and protecting the content, but allowing PAs to engage with technology in ways that are responsible as they're engaging with the platform. So that's kind of an ongoing evolution, how we're dealing with that and how we're thinking about that. There's always seems like there's one more thing that turns over the next time. I'm like, oh yeah, well, what about now that we're exiting PAs? How do we make sure that they know that they need to reapply at this time? What about, so it's this constant dance as we kind of change the way fundamentally that we're delivering exams and interacting with those taking those exams.
Oh, no,
It's been fun, but it's been challenging.
I bet. I was going to say, I've done some work in, customer journey mapping, and I'm just envisioning the disruption to that journey that you've basically injected in there. So, that definitely creates quite a number of different tentacles, but it sounds like you're taking them all in stride. Well, just to broaden a bit from you all in particular, would love to get your thoughts on, how you see, or why you see, I should say, longitudinal assessment, really growing so rapidly amongst the choices for alternatives to traditional recertification, and also your thoughts on maybe what's on the horizon. What do you see coming up for this assessment approach?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's any surprise that it really resonates with our, our end users, our diplomates or, our clinicians in the medical space. Medicine changes so fast, and so much is happening. I think there's something nice about this idea that we're constantly kind of engaging and refreshing with that item bank. And I think that's popular, that I could inject new content if needed at any given moment, certainly every year, and that people are engaging with that medical material on an ongoing basis. But there's lots of good evidence that that spaced education, that spaced assessment approach to engaging with material is great for memory retention. It's great for learning and internalizing new information. And so I think the draw for credentialing boards is it's a nice way to make sure that there is that constant engagement with that foundational knowledge that clinicians need to have. It resonates with us. I think it does with most of the ABMS boards that have moved this direction. And nearly all are working in this space in one form or shape or another. I think that really resonates. I think the fact that our clinicians, our end users, our PAs would rather do this than take a day, 2 weeks off and study, take a day off, drive to the testing center, be stressed for a whole day, wait 3 days, go, pass, and then forget about it for 10 years. It's not a process that they felt there was value in. And the fact that they're giving back and saying, this is valuable, that we see and appreciate the value in this, makes it a win on both sides. I don't think it's a surprise that organizations are moving this direction. It seems to give a little bit to everyone. The public knows that there's this push towards continual competence, which is so important. On the credentialing side, on the regulatory side for us, we feel like there's real value in being able to have people engage with the material on an ongoing basis. And I think the end users love the flexibility and can see the utility in a way they don't necessarily for an ongoing maintenance of certification with a one-time exam. Feels like everybody gets a little something. I think the big question is sustainability and the way that we have to develop content, and that there is this constant worry about what happens to that content that is oftentimes exposed. The minute we put it out, it's out there. And so what do we do to secure that? How do we move forward? Is it more rapid publishing? Leaning more into AI technology to maybe make quicker and faster changes to that content. Perhaps it's, altering the way that we present our items so they're less easy to compromise. Something that looks like an electronic medical record is much harder to capture and send to, a chat bot and get a quick answer on than a multiple choice question, which is kind of contained, the answer's there somewhere. How do we use response time in different ways, which is in some ways indicative of not just what you know, but how much ready access you have to that information. Responding quickly and correctly is certainly different than taking a long time, changing your answer 3 times, and probably looking up and maybe checking 3 or 4 different references for that answer. There's a different level of automaticity that suggests different levels of mastery. Maybe there are different ways that we can use response time to help us understand better how people are interacting with content. I think all of those things, are going to only add strength to longitudinal models. More content, faster content, more sophisticated ways to collect rather than I clicked A and it's the right answer. All of those things are going to make longitudinal programs stronger. And the inferences ultimately that we want to make about practitioners better and easier to stand behind.
Well, I'm encouraged that you all are not only, thinking about status quo, but thinking about continued development, because I know you're also very gracious to proffer that knowledge update in the industry, and we're all anxious to continue to hear the evolution. So thank you for that, Josh.
Yes.
And really just thank you for taking the time today. Really appreciate you lending your wisdom and sharing a bit about the great things that you guys are doing with this methodology at NCCPA. I have a distinct feeling we'll be having you on at another time for a different topic, given all the interesting stuff that you guys are doing down there. So thank you very much, Josh.
Thanks so much for having me, Warren. Let me talk a little bit about the work we're doing in this space. Always glad to share.
I appreciate it. And to our viewers, thank you for taking the time to view this episode. We do issue episodes about every 2 weeks, except for parts of the summer. So please do stay tuned. We look forward to seeing you on the next one. And in the meantime, take care and be well.